Rambam says, if you're amongst those people who take the words of Chazal literally, meaning they're midrashic and agadic words literally, even though they were not meant to be that way, al tashkach bidvarai. The Rambam says, for you people, you don't even have to listen to what I'm about to say. Below b'shum davar mizeho inyan, just don't pay attention to what I'm about to say. There's nothing about what I'm going to say which you're going to find pleasing. So just forget it. Isn't the Rambam amazing? Like he's saying to people, listen, I know you're not going to relate to what I'm saying. Not only that, but you're not going to like it. So don't listen, go do your thing, as we would say. It's not for you. It's a very, strong statement. I know that my words are going to damage you, and you're going to despise what I say. So just don't pay attention. Tune out. Now he gives an example. How could food, which is light in its amount and yet contains nutritional value in its quality, how can that be satisfying? For a person who's already gotten used to in their diet all kinds of heavy, unhealthy foods. So if you're used to heavy, unhealthy foods, then a person is going to tell you where the lighter, nutritious foods are better for you, you should be eating them. You're not going to be able to relate to what they're saying, nor enjoy that food. The food is actually harmful for him, because the way his diet is right now, his body's used to that. It's not going to be good for him, and he's going to despise them. Halotira ma'amru ha'anashim shahayu regilim le'achol betzalim v'shumim v'dagim v'hadagim. He says, take a look at our people who left Mitzrayim, and they were accustomed to eating onions and garlic and fish. V'nafshenu katsam b'lechem ha'kalokel. What did they say? We despise this lightweight food. What were they referring to? Man. So man was about as spiritual for a physical food as you could get. It was food, but it was lechem min hashamayim. Well, for people who are used to eating onions and garlic and fish, for them, the man was like, what is this? This is not satisfying. I'm not like biting into a steak here. So the Rambam is saying, b'derech mashal, if you're in the first two categories, my words are going to be like that for you. You're used to thinking in a very opaque, almost dense kind of way, a highly literal kind of way. My words are not going to do it for you. But if you are in the third group of people, and when you see words of the Chachamim, which appear to be very hard to understand and distant from reason, ta'amod v'tisponein v'teida shehu chida umashal. You, this third group, you're going to take your time, going to contemplate and reflect, and you're going to know that their words are riddles and analogies, metaphors. V'tishkav ashuk halev u'terud hara'ayon. And you're going to lie down with this, completely absorbed in these thoughts, in your mind and in your heart. The chiburo u'bisvaraso, in the composition of their words and in what it actually means. So you're taking these words very seriously. You know they're very deep, and they're going to preoccupy your attention by trying to figure out what they mean. The tachshov limsa kavanas haseichel ve'emunas hayasher. you're going to think about trying to find something which is intelligent and completely upright in terms of our emunah, Kamosha Nemar, as it says in Koheles, Limtso divrei chefetz, to find words that are desirable, v'chasuv yosher divrei emes, and that which is written to be upright and true. So these are real truth seekers. They're people who really want to try and understand what these mysterious words of the Chachamim are all about. V'oz tistakel b'sifri zeh. So you, this group of people, you can take a look at my book now. You can learn the rest of what I'm going to say here. V'yo'il l'cha be'ezras Hashem, and it will be helpful to you with God's help. So that's how the Rambam kind of introduces what he's about to say, that if you're in group number 1 or group number 2, just forget about it. Go somewhere, go do something else. If you're in group number 3, you're going to gain from what I'm going to say right now, and you're going to be able to appreciate these words. So go ahead, pay attention, and think deeply about what I'm about to say. Okay, that's the Rambam until this point. Any questions or comments up until now? Moshe, please, you want to unmute?
He doesn't have like a goal to educate them, meaning he's basically writing only for the population that wants to learn.
The Rambam here, in all of his love and compassion for the Jewish people, which is mighty and strong, he understands that there are certain people you can't talk to. They're fixed in their thinking. They're not going to break out of their thinking. He knows these people. He knows how insistent they are on what they believe and what they think, and you can't tell them anything different. And if the Rambam can't tell them anything different, then who can? So he gets it. The Rambam understands that there's the impenetrable. When it comes to these topics, he's not saying that they don't have good things about them. The second group he's not with at all. They're disparaging of the Chachamim. He dismisses them almost completely. The first group are good Jews. They're just highly literal, not educated, and they don't really get it, and they're not going to get it. And the Rambam knows that, so yeah, he's saying right now, this group of people are not educable in this respect. That's exactly what he's saying.
So interesting.
So Moshe, as a principal and an educator, would that be a popular approach in our day and age?
To an extent, I would say actually with social media being very present and people's opinions being posted clearly and loudly, there is definitely a response to not respond to people who are not going to listen anyway. So instead of responding to those people, you don't, right? I think because the mindset is that they fit into one of those categories of either it's impossible to educate them on the full spectrum of whatever topic they're talking about for them to really grasp the situation, or they're really just there to vent and be angry and they're stuck in their ways and what you say won't fix it. So it's interesting to me that he, is writing a sefer and he's so clear and he's so thorough and he's so broad-minded that he's still saying like, yeah, some people I'm not talking to you.
Right. That's what he's saying. You use the expression stuck in their ways. It's pretty clear that in this area of their life and thought, the Rambam saw these two groups of people, as being stuck in their ways. Yeah.
Interesting.
It's a lesson. Nachshon, please, want to unmute yourself?
Okay. No, just say you can also look at it as maybe, I don't want to say reverse psychology, because I remember one time, I wish I remember the whole story. There was a story about a rabbi who got dressed up to go and went to this house of a banker. and the banker wanted to know why he went to see him, and he wouldn't tell him. And he spent hours there, and then finally he was gonna leave, and the banker was like, "Come on, tell me, why are you here?" And I guess he told him that you're not allowed to say something to somebody who's not gonna accept it. So I'm not gonna say it to you because I know I'm wasting my time. You're not gonna listen to what I'm gonna tell you. And then eventually the guy going, tell me. He just kept insisting to tell him. He said, well, okay, well, you're not gonna listen, but I'm gonna tell you. You have a mortgage on this widow, and you're gonna evict her, and I want you to hold back and let her just stay at the house. And the banker said, oh, I can't do that. He said, well, I told you you're not gonna listen to me. But it turned out that at the end of the story was the banker actually did listen to him, and he went the next day to the bank and he worked out things that the widow was able to stay in the house. So I mean, can we also look at that? Maybe Rambam was also looking at these two groups, like, hey, you're not going to listen to me, so don't even listen. Maybe they will listen, and something might open up in their mind and listen.
It's a nice point. It's very possible, because sometimes that's exactly what it takes, to people is to bring them around, is to say, sorry, it's not for you. And then they think, well, maybe it is for me. Who says it's not for me? So perhaps the Rambam is taking that approach. Nice thought. Ellie Gregis, please, you want to unmute yourself, Ellie? Thank you, Nasha.
So, according to the Rambam, any story not in Tanakh that is not Derech HaTeva is a mashal, or are there some stories that are possibly did happen, that aren't in Tanakh but were like Nisim?
He's not talking about Nisim. Now, if a miracle happens, and it's a miracle, let's say, for example, in the Gemara Chulin, in Daf Zayin, so Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, he splits a river. And the Chachamim compare it to Kriyas Yamsuf. So that's literal. That's meant to be literal. He split that water, and he split it 3 times. So a nace is a nace. But when they say something which is so unusual and different, and as the Rambam says, impossible, that's not meant to be a nace. I'll go back to my mashal, Avram Avinu hanging a gemstone on the sun. They're not trying to communicate a nace there. He didn't climb up there and put that up there on the sun. They're trying to communicate an idea. And when that idea, says the Rambam, is impossible, then we have to know it's something deeper. But most definitely, when the Chachamim are describing what is a nace, and there were nisim that happened to Chazal, and nisim that they did, then that's taken to be a nace.
So how are we supposed to differentiate between the two?
Once again, we have to look at the Meforshim. Mm-hmm. We have to see what the Meforshei HaAgada and Meforshei HaMidrash say about that, and see, is it meant to be something miraculous that occurred, or is there some kind of a deep lesson going on in these words which is not literal? We can only be guided by our Meforshim.
Okay. Sure.
Ellie Weiner. Ellie, want to unmute? Thanks, Ellie.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of the Chazal writing these in a riddle type of situation, these stories in riddles, hard to understand, was to really to address only certain type of people anyway. It was to limit it to not to the masses. They would probably would not understand it, but they wanted to limit it to some very few people that really could dive into it and really understand at a deeper level. So we're not talking about the masses here anyway. It would seem.
You're right. It's a very good point. And the Chachamim are intentionally hiding deeper ideas from people who will not grasp these ideas, or will misunderstand them, misapply them, misinterpret them. That's true. It's not meant to be understood, shall we say, by the masses. Yeah, good point. Okay, now the Rambam is going to take us to an area now that we I've not touched on, and he's kind
Can
of
you talk
moving.
about that a little bit more? That not everything is supposed to be applied to the masses.
Yeah, that the Chachamim knew that there were, let's call them sodos. So if we're going to with the Mukubalim, the sodos HaTorah, the Kabbalistic sodos of the Torah are not meant for everybody, not even for Talmidei Chachamim. It's meant for a very unique and special group of people who are tzaddikim, kadoshim, tahorim in their lives. No, those kinds of things are not meant for everybody. And we
As a
saw
reward for their work that they're doing, as
no, the deeper they go into Torah, the deeper their relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Ramchal says in the Derech Hashem that the deeper you go in the Torah, the greater the hashpa'ah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in that facet of Torah. So a person who gains that, they gain that. Now that doesn't mean that a person who's not on that madrega can't have a beautiful, pure relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah that they're learning. They absolutely can. And they can even learn Lishma. Not everybody who learns Lishma is Zocha to understand the words of the Zohar. They're learning Lishma according to what they know, and that's a very high madrega. So Kol Echa Kafi Darko, Kafi Yecholto, Hashem gives them their abilities, and that's the key, to make the most out of one's abilities. And why Hashem made this person Moshe Rabbeinu and somebody else a simple Jew, each one doing their best. That's how Hashem, you might say, distributed the neshamos and the tafkidim amongst people.
so the Zohar, which is the Torah, which is also Torah Sheba'al Peh, as I understand it, it's not meant for all of Klal Yisrael. You're saying it's meant for a section, a portion of Klal Yisrael.
Yes. So one day it will be, right? One day the sodos of Torah will be for everybody. When Mashiach comes, it will be open to one and all. So it's not like people won't get that. One day everybody will. Umalo Oretz Deus Hashem. But in terms of throughout history, a lot of people will not be able to be masig those words, or the writings of the Arizal. Right? The Gaon of Vilna said there were only two people in history who truly understood the writings of the Ari. Two people. So everybody else, who's on even very high madregos, they're not really getting the essence of the words of the Arizal, but they're certainly getting a lot out of it according to their madrega. And for other people, that's simply not their chelek in Torah. There's a fascinating story about the Arizal in Sfat with the Alshich. And the Alshich used to fall asleep in some of those lecturers. And the Alshich was an Ish Kadosh, Nora Ma'od. And now that I'm saying it, I can't remember if it was the Arizal or the Beis Yosef. They were both Mukubalim. I can't remember now. And he said about the Alshich falling asleep, it's not his chelik in Torah. These particular things I'm teaching right now, it's not meant for the Alshich. It's not his chelik. And it wasn't said in any type of disparaging or critical way. It's just not for him. Now the Alshich already himself, was the greatest of the great. So we're talking about level after level after level, So yeah, the Rambam is saying, well, let's say we take that approach. It's not for everybody. It's not meant to be for everybody. Okay, Ellie, let me just circle back with you because I want to get to this paragraph we're about to learn, so we can start to penetrate of where the Rambam's heading here. And now it's letter Gimel. The ato echel ledaber b'masha kivanti lo. So the Rambam says, okay, now I'm going to start to talk about that which I have been meaning to talk about, which means that everything until now has been setting the stage for what he really wants to say. Heva yodeh, you should know, ki kamo shelo yasig hasuma ein hatzvaim, just as a blind person cannot perceive the nature of color, and the appearance of color. Ve'ein hacheresh masig shema hakolos, and a deaf person cannot perceive sound and distinctions of sound. V'lo hasoris ta'avas hamishkol, and a person who is castrated cannot perceive the pleasure of the sexual relationship. It's outside of the experience of their body. Kain lo yasigu hagufos hata'anugim hanafshim. So too, physical bodies cannot perceive and experience spiritual pleasure. So to talk about spiritual pleasure to a person who is living in a body is like talking about color to someone who's blind, or sound to someone who's deaf. Ukamosha hadogim einam yodim yisod ha'esh. Just as fish do not know anything about the yisod of fire, lefi shehiyusam b'yisod shahu hefcho, because their entire existence is in the yisod, which is the exact opposite of fire, which is water. Their whole life is water, so they can't know fire. Kain ein noda b'zeh ha'olam hagufani, ta'anug ha'olam haruchani. So too, one who lives in this physical world cannot understand the pleasure of the spiritual worlds. Living here in Olam Hazeh, we cannot understand the tainug of Olam HaBa. It's completely beyond us. Avol ein etzleinu b'shum panim, ta'anug zulasi ta'anug haguf bilvad. All that we know on any account is the pleasure of the body. That's all we know. V'hasogas hachushim, and that which our senses can experience, min hamachol, v'hamishta, v'hamishkol, when it comes to eating and drinking and the sexual relationship. V'chol masha zulasi eile, anything outside of physical pleasures, hu etzleinu bilti matzui, is simply not found amongst us. Ve'ein anu makiri no so, v'lo nasigo so, b'techilas hamachshava. We cannot even recognize it or grasp it in the beginning of our thought process. Ella achar chakira gedol. It takes an enormous amount of investigation, contemplation, thought, and of course Torah, to even begin to know a drop of what this is talking about. V'roi lihiyosken, and this is entirely appropriate and suitable. Lefi sha'anachnu ba'olam hagufani, because we are here living in a physical world. Lefika einonu masigim ela ta'anugim hagruim hanifsakim. We only experience inferior pleasures, meaning physical pleasures. Hanifsakim means they're temporary. By definition, they do not last. Physical pleasure is temporary. Avol hata'anugim hanafshim heim tamidim. But spiritual pleasure is ongoing and constant. Omdim lo'ad. It lasts forever. Ve'enam nifsakim, and it never stops. So the Rambam is saying this very deep concept here. We're familiar with physical pleasure only, and all physical pleasure by definition stops. It has an end. Whereas spiritual pleasure by definition has no end. And we're not familiar with that. And I'll add these words, not that I can add to what the Rambam is saying, but just to emphasize the point. When it comes to physical pleasure, not only does it stop, but if we have too much of it, we get sick. A person gets disgusted by too much physical pleasure. But when it comes to spiritual pleasure, that's not the case. It just goes and goes and goes, and there's no end, and it's complete oneg, which never stops. Ve'ein beinehem ubein elu hata'anugim yachas. There is no relationship between oneg ruchni and oneg gashmi. V'lo kurva b'shum panim, and there's nothing similar about them whatsoever. Ve'ein ra'ui etzleinu ba'alei haTorah, and for us, people of the Torah, it's not fitting for us. Below eitzel ha'elohiim min ha'filosophiim, nor amongst the philosophers, he means now of the Gentile world, who contemplated godly matters. Shenomar, who would say, Shehamalachim v'hakochavim v'hagalgalim ein lahem tanu. He said something here which to us is very foreign. Not about the malachim, but about the stars and the planets. He said, any one of us Torah people, or the philosophers amongst the true philosophers amongst the Gentiles, he said, nobody would say that the angels and the stars and the planets, the constellations, have no pleasure. They do in actuality have great pleasure. In that which they perceive about the truth of Hashem's existence. Now we can relate to that when it comes to Malachim. But the Rambam is saying that even stars and planets and constellations have an awareness of God. And the truth is that's not so distant from us, because every morning in Shacharis and the first of the brachos of Kriya Shema, we talk about that. And the sun and the moon and the stars are all saying their praises to Hashem. Ubazeheim b'tainug tamidi she'eno nifsak. And this level of creation is in a state of perpetual oneg, which never stops. Ve'ein tainug gufni etzlam, ve'eno masigim oso. They have no physical pleasure, and they could never relate to what physical pleasure is. It's completely beyond their experience. Lefi she'ein lahem chushim kamonu. They don't have senses like we do. Sheyasigu bohem ma she'anu masigin oso, to perceive and experience that which we do. So just like for us, spiritual oneg is completely outside of our experience, for them, physical oneg is completely outside of their frame of reference and experience. Ukamochein anachnu, and one day it will be like that for us too. Kisheyizdakeh mimenu, misha yizdakeh v'ya'aleh la'osa ma'ala. When one becomes purified, those who were zoche to that and reach such high levels, achar moso, after we die and go on to higher worlds, eno ma'asig hata'anugim hagufaniim, we will no longer relate to physical pleasure anymore. Ve'eno rotza bohem, and we won't want it. When we leave this world and go to the next world, we'll have no relationship to physical pleasure. It will mean nothing to us. Elo ke'ein sheyirtza hamelach. Now he gives a mashal. You have a king, shehu gadol hamemshala. He's at the very height of authority in this world. Sheyispashet mimalchuso umemshalto v'yachzor l'sachek im hanorim b'kadur b'rechovo so'ir. A king who's at the height of everything this world has to offer in all ways and can have whatever he wants. He's not going to be attracted to go playing ball in the street with little boys. He's not going to find that pleasurable. Afal pi shekavar hoya bizman she'avar below safek tov be'inav l'sachek b'kadur min hamalchus. Even though there was a time in his life when he liked to play ball in the street with the little boys, when he was a little boy. So that king who has a grand palate and everything is available to him has no relationship to a 6-year-old playing stickball. But he once did, and he once enjoyed it, and he once liked it. But now it's remote from him, completely distant from him with what he has in his life. V'zeh b'katnu shanav, when he was just a child, k'shelo haya mavchin ben ma'alas shnei ha'inyanim, when he knew that no difference between what he was doing, playing ball, and that which a king gets to have. As a child, he was unaware of that. K'mo she'anachnu hayom mishabchin u'menasin ta'anugei haguf al ta'anugei hanefesh. He says that's what we're like. In this world, we extol physical pleasure because that's what we know. It's like the little boy playing baseball. But when we get to the next world, those pleasures of this world will be meaningless to us. They'll mean nothing to the spiritual oneg which we're going to have at that point. Now we'll stop here, take a couple for the night, take a couple questions, but notice how the Rambam is now putting something out for us to really start to think about. Talking about before Olam HaBa, what it means, how to understand Chazal, what does it mean to do something lishma, shelo lishma. The Rambam's heading toward talking about Olam HaBa, and he lays down this principle for us that we cannot relate to it. It's beyond anything we could possibly imagine in our life, in our frame of reference. We know physical pleasure, not spiritual pleasure. So he's laying down that yesod very clearly for us, but he's also telling us that one day we will know that, and we will appreciate it deeply, and everything we know now as pleasure will be meaningless to us. He's opening up the door for us to start thinking about what Olam HaBa is like, even within our very limited frame of reference in this world. He wants to light that spark, that it will take all of these pleasures and set them aside, ki'ilu, they're nothing. And not only that, it never ends. It's constant. And every pleasure we know here ends and is temporal. We don't know what that's like. It even sounds to us like it's not so pleasurable to always have that, because we don't know what it's talking about. We simply don't know. It's like when you hear sometimes, I've been asked by children or teenagers, isn't going to be boring when Mashiach comes? It sounds so boring. And if you're a child, it does sound boring. So, okay, we at least will admit we don't understand it, what it's going to be like. But we know it's not going to be boring because we'll be overwhelmed with this knowledge of Hashem, Kamayim Hayam Layam Mechasim. But if you're in that place, it sounds like, oh, I don't want that. I need to be, involved in playing football and running around with my friends. Well, that will be left behind, and will be in the remote, so remote from us that it will be meaningless. That's what the Rambam wants us to try and get into, that frame of mind when we're talking about Olam HaBa. Okay, Eli Weiner, question or comment? Please unmute yourself.
I'm having trouble with this because we do have spiritual. Oh,
that's good.
Okay, I guess I'm on the right track. I mean, we do have spiritual pleasure in this world, for sure.
Like what?
Shabbos is spiritual. Learning is a spiritual thing. That's certainly not.
Is that what we're feeling? Are we feeling spiritual pleasure?
Maybe I'm feeling something.
That's right.
In owning Shabbos, you're using the physical and having pleasure from it. That's the whole point of that's owning. That's pleasure. And about emotion.
What's owning Shabbos? Food, drink, relations between husband and wife, nice clothing. Owning Shabbos is physical pleasure.
The davening could be there's all different type of pleasures, not necessarily physical.
Okay, so now I'll grant you for a moment because that's the next place the Rambam is going. But I want to go back to this for a minute. We have physical pleasure on Shabbos. It's just that we believe that contained in that physical pleasure of Shabbos is something very deeply spiritual. Me'ein Olam HaBa.
Okay.
But that's not what we're experiencing. We are tasting that cholent. We're tasting that chicken and that kiddush. We're enjoying nice clothes.
We're doing a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to do it, though. You're doing it.
Absolutely.
Kind of,
Absolutely. And it's disguised in the physical world. And we will one day live out the spiritual dimension of that Shabbos and that Yom Tov, which is with us when we experience it here, but is beyond our perception.
But there is some spiritual part to it, though. Even
it is, but we're not aware of it.
What am I feeling then? I'm feeling something more spiritual. Maybe it's me. I don't
In English, we choose to use that word, spiritual.
Okay, what word should I use?
It's emotional, it's intellectual. Now, you were talking about davening, emotional pleasure. Now, the Rambam's going to go from here, we'll see it next week, to things that are not directly physical pleasure, which I think is what you're talking about.
Right, okay.
But they're also not yet spiritual pleasure, because remember the Rambam's Yesod. We got to go back to his words. You cannot explain color to a blind man. You cannot experience spiritual pleasure if you live in Olam Hazeh. That's axiomatic. So
okay.
is there spiritual pleasure inside that Shabbos experience we're having? Yes, absolutely. Is there spiritual pleasure inside every mitzvah that we're doing? Yes, absolutely. Is that what we are aware of it when we're doing it? No, it's not. We will be aware of that in Olam HaBa.
So what are we getting at? We're having what is it now? It's not spiritual, then what is it?
Oneg. It's a spiritual, emotional, intellectual, it is a physical, emotional, intellectual pleasure. Spiritual oneg is not experienceable in this world. That's what the Rambam said, b'fem mole.
So people that say they're close to God, they feel the godliness. What is that all about?
The feeling.
The feeling.
It's a feeling.
It's a spiritual feeling. No.
In English, you can use that word. In the Rambam's word, we cannot use that word. In the Ramchal's word, we cannot use that word.
Oh, I'll take it back.
Kind of something we got to drive into our minds because we're talking about something that we use English words for. But the Rambam just told us it's like trying to explain sound to a deaf person. It does not compute. But what we don't want to confuse that in saying there's nothing spiritual happening on Shabbos or Yom Tov, or there's everything spiritual happening when we do that. It's just that we're not aware of it. But we will be.
Okay, I have to get around.
So you got to chew on that for a while.
How do you frame like Rebbes?
Moshe, again?
How do you frame Hasidic Rebbes, Mekubalim?
They're experiencing the highest levels of seichel and emotion. Now, if you're talking about somebody who has Ruach HaKodesh, well, that's a different story. That is spiritual. That's when spirituality for them becomes part of their life. Ruach HaKodesh is a different thing, and certainly Nevuah. But if we're not talking about that madrega, we're talking about the highest levels and the purest levels of intellectual and emotional and physical experience in this world possible. In English, we can use the word spiritual. That's what we think we're talking about. But once we use that word ruchni, then we can't.
Would we call it maturity?
Yeah.
Like you can see like a kid who would play sports all day and then, go to Israel and come back and they're no longer following, those things, and they're dedicating their time to, Torah learning and mitzvos and productivity. Like we can see miniature transformations like that of what the Rambam's talking about.
Yes.
But that's not ruchnius.
No, we use that word, they're growing in ruchnius and things like that. It's okay. It's a colloquial word. We know what we're talking about. We're steiging, What the Rambam is saying here, once again, is oneg ruchni. Oneg ruchni cannot be experienced in this world in strict terms.
Even by learning Torah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're at the highest levels of what I'm going to call pure, holy intelligence and emotion. Unless the person goes into the realm of Ruach HaKodesh, then that's different. And I'm okay in English saying it's a spiritual experience. And I'm okay even in Hebrew saying he's growing in Ruchnius. But I'm not okay with saying that person has experienced Oneg Ruchni, because that's impossible while inhabiting a physical body.
Yeah, the pleasure that we can receive in this world by having a quote-unquote Ruchnius experience is a different type of pleasure. It's a different qualitative type of a pleasure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's meant to be. Kedusha Dika pleasure is quite the opposite of Tuma Dika pleasure. Tuma Dika pleasure is self-centered, self-involved, self-destructive often. Kedusha Dika pleasure is selfless. It's about others. It's about Hashem. It's rooted in two very different things and they're very different experiences.
Can a neshama, sorry if I'm taking the floor over here, can a neshama that is completely spiritual, right? If it's tying to the Torah and it's trapped in the physical body, but it's being fed spiritual fuel, how is it not experiencing any pleasure on a neshama level?
The neshama is experiencing pleasure. The neshama is experiencing the spiritual oneg of the Torah and the Shabbos and the Yom Tov and the mitzvahs.
Here, in this world, in us.
Yes, but it's outside of our awareness. The neshama very much enjoys when his body is sitting down learning Torah and doing a mitzvah. But we're not aware of that which the neshama is feeling.
So would it be safe to say, Rabbi, that right this moment, as we're all learning and discussing, that our neshamas are getting some level of hana, even though we're not actually aware of it?
Absolutely. It would be very safe to say that, and in my opinion, correct to say that, because Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, and our neshama is experiencing that right now. And we are not aware of what our neshama is experiencing right now. We know what our mind and our heart and our goof are experiencing right now, to an extent. but not what our neshama is experiencing right now. But it is. And one day that will be directly experienced when we leave this world after 120 years. All right, did you have another comment on that? Okay, let's take one more, Ellie, then we'll break for the night. Go ahead, Al. Ellie, please unmute. There you go.
Is it fair to say that Abba Rishon before the Ched had that a spiritual awareness?
Sure. He's living on a completely different plane than we're living on now. Absolutely.
So after the Ched, he became a physical thing, and then he lost that spiritual, whatever.
Correct. And then we regained that at Har Sinai.
We lost, yeah.
We just touched that on Shavuos. We just touched that reality. And then there was the Chet HaEgel, and once again we lost it. And that's how we remain until Yemos HaMashiach.
Okay.
Okay, so
His
we have things to
introduction
think
was
about.
totally appropriate.
What's that, Moshe?
Rabbi, this is Mark.
Appropriate.
Hold on, Mark. Say it again, Moshe.
All
The
right.
Rambam's introduction was totally appropriate.
Right, now we get it, right?
We get it, we don't get it.
Right.
Okay.
We get that we don't get it.
Rabbi?
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question. I'm serious. I consider myself, I think you can understand me easily. I'm a mature sports fan. So do I understand that in Olam HaBa, there's not going to be any real sports as we know it down here? Olam, seriously, that's what I'm asking.
Well, Mark, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Oh,
But it's okay to enjoy sports while you're here in this world till 120, because there's a lot of good things that can be learned from sports, that can come out of sports, as long as it's done in the right way, just like any other thing in this world, which you can get a lot out of if it's done in the right way.
oh, thank you. Okay.
Okay, so gentlemen, just one other comment. So next week, we're going to start to learn earlier, because it's just going to get a little too late to start as Marv continues to get a little later. So I want to start at 7:15. I hope that doesn't mess you up. Sorry, Nachshon, I can see that messes you up. And we'll go to 8 o'clock. Otherwise, we're going to be starting 9:10, 9:15. It just gets a little too late.
I
So
see
the
that
shir will be from,
this.
what's that?
I see that you're recording this.
Yes, I'm recording it.
Would you feel comfortable sending it to people in this group if
Sure.
they couldn't attend
Sure.
it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be happy to send it. I'm going to be posting these things also in the shul website too as well. You get just starting to file them and organize them. So B'ezras Hashem, yeah. So we're going to start at 7:15 and go to 8 o'clock. Go to 8 o'clock next week. And Nachshon, I apologize.
No, that's okay. You don't have to apologize, Rabbi. I just want to say one thing. I know we need to leave, but what I was mentioning earlier about the reverse psychology, just a little bit that you mentioned, just by Rambam saying that anybody from the first two groups would be pulling their hairs and say, "Wait, we definitely need to listen to this." You know, they're definitely not going to walk away from that one. Because it's very inviting. It really is. I mean, like
Compelling.
Just us hearing just that a little bit is very like, it's almost like the red pill, blue pill, except it's the opposite. The red pill, blue pill, the red pill gives you an unpleasant truth or a blissful fantasy or whatever it is, or I forget what it was. But this is the opposite. It's a very blissful truth that's waiting for us. But then again, another question was: is it something that's automatic or something that we have to work toward?
It's something that we have to work toward. Absolutely, yes. We have to work toward it. But I want to say this, even though I really like your idea, Nachshon, that I think that the two groups of people that the Rambam was talking about did not have the same type of way of relating to this that we do. The way he is describing them, they were very dug in to their way of seeing things.
too locked up.
Right. I think that's what he means. So halavai that they, all of us, wherever we're locked up, and it applies to everybody that we should try and get unlocked and be able to experience higher things.
Yes. Rabbi, thank you.
Yashikach, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Take care, Mark.
Okay. Bye-bye.